New Brevard County property appraiser Dana Blickley says fresh housing data point to a stabilizing economy. Also stabilizing, her office after a difficult and at times bizarre transition after she unseated longtime property appraiser Jim Ford. You'll hear both stories in my interview today with Blickley, who took office in January. She also describes some of the most frequently overlooked property tax discounts for residents. Are you getting yours? Watch our discussion. Dana, you're the elected official who has the best sense of our tax base. You oversee how much properties are worth. You have a sense of how the economy is going. What are you seeing in Brevard?
Well, for 2013, Matt, you saw that we reported positive market trends for every city and in just about every part of the county throughout Brevard. So that was certainly refreshing from what we've seen in the previous years. So we did see an increase overall of about 5% in terms of overall aggregate taxable values throughout the county. It's about 8 or 9% in terms of market value, taxable value, just under 5%.
Right. So even Palm Bay, there were a couple of places in Brevard that really were of concern. They were some of the slowest to turn around just because of the inventory. So if it's turning around in places like that, that must be good news?
Oh, absolutely. We saw positive trends in both Titusville, the Titusville area, the North End, Palm Bay, and even parts of Cocoa that had slower movement, positive movement, if you will. The beaches, of course, did a little bit better, in terms of their overall percentage change from last year to this year. But everybody saw an increase based on what the buyers and sellers are dictating.
One thing I wondered about is, does that include foreclosures, and I hear fear that there are a lot of foreclosures that are going to come out and onto the market all of a sudden or something. What do you know about that?
Well, foreclosures definitely affect the overall market value, and of course they affect the inventory, available inventory, which does drive prices for the arm's length transaction properties. What I can tell you, what we've seen is a reduction in the number of foreclosure sales that represent the total inventory available to be listed. So where a property appraiser cannot use foreclosure sales in terms of setting market rates, we do qualify short sales if in fact they meet that criteria. And we are noticing a reduction in the number of foreclosure sales that represent overall sales transactions in the market.
What do you mean by that? When you say that represent the overall, do you mean they were close enough in price or close enough in proximity that they ought to be considered?
No, total number of sales. In other words, if you had a particular area that had, say, 50 sales in a particular market area, at times the foreclosures represented almost all of the sales activity.
Oh,
now
I
the
see.
Foreclosure sales only represent about 40 to 45% of total sales.
That's still a lot.
Still a lot.
But that doesn't mean it's the majority or that's what you base them on necessarily.
That's correct, yeah. We do not derive market values from foreclosure sales. That's not lawful.
One of the things, though, that I wonder about is, okay, so we had this recession, property values really fell, they get down to this very low trough, but we have Save Our Homes, right, that will keep those from coming back up at the same rate as market values? Is that how that's going to work?
We do. We do. The Florida tax laws are based on both the cap for Save Our Homes that Amendment 10 produced, and then we also have some caps for non-homesteaded properties that Amendment 10 produced. So while you have a difference in the market value and the assessed value, because of those differentials, it will be slow in moving that assessed value back synonymous with market value.
I see. Well, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was you took office last year after a fairly tough campaign. Jim Ford had been in the office for many years. What was that transition like?
Well, it was a non-transition, I suppose, in terms of the prior administration greeting the potential new administration with open arms and sharing information and making that transition smooth, if you will. The previous official chose not to do that. So when I walked into the office on January the 8th, basically the entire administrative staff had left. So they left prior to me coming in. So it made the first few days tough. Had a payroll due in 48 hours.
Oh my, okay.
And it was fine. We got everybody paid, and that was fine. What it did give me an opportunity to do is restructure the office. And I did that. So we ended up with an overall restructuring with less chiefs, if you will, less members of administration, and I was able to convert those positions and those dollars into more boots on the ground, if you will.
I heard something about the furniture being gone. Was that true?
That was true. That was true.
Explain.
Well, the administrative office in Titusville was where the previous official, that's where his office was, and the only thing that was there when I got there on the 8th was some soiled carpet and a telephone that was on the floor. So he had surplused all of the furniture prior to leaving.
Let me guess, it was one of those chunky phones with the big, you know, with the wire and the push buttons.
Actually, it was a nice phone. The problem was that almost all of the phones had been either like turned off or pulled out of the wall, or were forwarded to other phones. So we had a couple of phones on that side of the office, but we didn't know what numbers were ringing to them. So it was an interesting couple of days. We were kind of crawling around on the floor and doing all kinds of logistics just to be able to operate.
And you were asked if you would like to keep the closed circuit camera on your parking space?
I was.
What was that about?
Well, evidently the prior official felt the need to have a security type camera along with some recording computer equipment in the office. Not quite sure what he was monitoring, but I don't have that need, if you will. I feel quite secure with the security that's there in the office, and it's no secret that I'm there every day working.
On a legitimate policy kind of or point, one of the things Jim Ford did was he used that office as a platform to campaign for tax policy, for the Save Our Homes Amendment or for tax cuts, that kind of thing. He would tout those achievements and his positions on his website. Is that going to be your posture?
No, no. No, it's not. Certainly, we keep our finger on the pulse of what's going on legislatively for taxpayers in terms of legislation, good or bad, that would affect taxpayers either negatively or positively, and we keep that arm of the organization operating efficiently. That's not my job, Matt. My job is to report values accurately, equitably, and uniformly for all properties in Brevard County. On an annual basis, and also to administer exemptions and property classifications lawfully. That's the thrust of what we do 365 days out of a year. So that is not the basis of communication between our office and taxpayers.
Well, let's talk about appraisals, because that is what your office is there primarily to do. And I know that you have made some changes or updates to how you do that. Give us a sense of what's going on.
Well, the overall three approaches to value haven't changed, but certainly the administration of the office has changed in how we approach those appraisals and the amount of information that not only are we taking in to be able to produce more accurate assessments, but also to deliver that information to constituents and to taxing authorities so folks have adequate time to give us feedback. You know, nobody knows more about your property than you do. And we're always looking at it on a mass appraisal basis. But the earlier we get information to you in terms of what our value estimates are, the better we're going to be as estimators in producing an accurate value. So I do have more boots on the ground. We do have more field evaluators, more analysts, more IT folks, and we have less folks at administration. So we're able to, I believe, do a better job in qualifying all of the sales activity out there and determining what's appropriate for market rates. Physically inspecting properties where that is needed, and having more folks available to analyze all of the data that's out there needed to calibrate those three approaches.
Give me a sense of when I might have somebody from the property appraiser's office come by to look at my house if I choose to sell it or refinance or whatever. When does that happen? Sure,
a couple of different reasons. Number one, you may pull a permit, and that may require that we come out there. You may be putting on an addition, or you may be putting in a swimming pool, and we may be adding that attribute to the assessment roll. That's one. You may call us and say, hey, I feel like that my property is overassessed because of this reason or that reason, and you may ask that we come in and physically inspect the property because you feel that the value is incorrect. We may have an inspection if for some reason there's some economic obsolescence, there's something within your market area that potentially affects your value, and we're doing an inspection to determine those types of factors.
One of the things I wonder about sometimes is are there areas or sectors within the local economy that you might appraised differently from either your predecessor or maybe some commercial appraisers? I know there are lots of different theories or articles about how people go about appraising a hotel, for example, or not necessarily homes, but commercial property and different types of businesses. Are there any different approaches that you'll bring to this?
No, not in terms of the approaches to value. Certainly there are certain approaches to value that are more appropriate for certain types of property. For instance, a lot of commercial type income producing property, we weight the income approach very heavily on those types of properties because they're the most accurate in terms of reflecting market values. But there's no new approach to value, if you will. Certainly there's a more thorough process and a more accurate process in terms of the amount of data, bad data in, bad data out, no data in, very poor data out. So the approaches to value, haven't changed, but I would say that our methods and policies are producing much better accurate value estimates.
The key thing that I think most of our residents experience at this time of year is they start getting their trim notices, right, that show what their taxes are going to be. Your office sends those out, correct?
We do.
Are those going to be different this year? Is there a difference in how you process or send those?
Big difference, and probably the biggest difference was the informational supplement that was included with the trim notice this year, and I can tell you there's been an overwhelming positive response for that. I don't know if you'll remember from your previous information supplements that were in your trim notice, but they were pretty politically charged in terms of the type of information that was included in the supplement. There was very little information that was really informative for the taxpayers. This year what we did is we completely changed that. It went from being like a 4-page insert, if you will, to a 2-page, pretty colorful insert that brought folks' attention to certain types of exemptions or property classifications or property tax discounts that may be applicable for them that they weren't aware of. So that's definitely generated a great number of calls and a great number of folks that are applying for exemptions that they meet criteria for.
Well, let's talk about that because I know that's one of the biggest issues one of the issues that you have to contend with is the issue of homestead exemptions, different exemptions. What are some of the exemptions that maybe some of our viewers may be qualified for but don't know about? What are some of the most common ones that they should investigate?
Probably the most common ones are senior exemptions for folks that are 65 years of age or older and meet an income requirement. There are many discounts for veterans in terms of disabilities, combat-related, service-connected disabilities, up to 100%. Total and permanent disability exemptions. There are other exemptions for deployed individuals that have been deployed, and that's a property tax discount versus an exemption.
Okay.
That's another area that folks can qualify for property tax relief. Mainly our senior population are veterans, and believe it or not, Matt, there's a lot of folks that live in their homes for years and have no idea what a homestead exemption is.
Is that right?
That happens every year.
Is it still $25,000 off the property value, or has it gone up? Where are we at today?
It's up to $50,000 based on your assessed value, for how much you have, and that actually was included in the insert. So we gave you kind of a little cheat sheet, a little pyramid this year that said if your assessed value is this, your exemption can be up to this. So it can be up to $50,000.
Have you gotten a response to that insert?
We have overwhelmingly positive response. We've doubled our numbers in terms of late file applications for folks that feel that they qualify for an exemption that they weren't aware of, or maybe they had some extenuating circumstances as to why they didn't file originally. Big response from our veterans. We just don't reach everybody using the internet, so we've done a lot of community outreach, and we've attended a lot of events that generally are attended by a lot of veterans and made information available to our veterans, so we're also getting a great response with that.
On one hand, you try to encourage people to apply for all the homestead exemptions that they are entitled to. On the other hand, one of the things your office does is investigate claims that people are getting exemptions that they are not entitled to.
We do.
How does that process work?
Well, unfortunately, because there are so many cases out there for folks that are receiving exemptions that they shouldn't be, we're pretty much reactive.
Okay.
Meaning that most of our investigations come from returned mail, or just through the process itself by virtue of property that changes hands or titles and changes that are made, or changes to addresses that are made through the office or through the office of the tax collector. Sometimes that information comes to us that way. There's really no way for us to be proactive because those are much more difficult cases to find. For instance, properties that are rented versus occupied by the owner, or folks that have additional residency-based exemptions in other states outside of the state of Florida. Those are a little bit more difficult to find and cover. But we use due diligence in making sure that when you receive a property tax exemption that you are duly qualified for it.
How many, you get a lot of cases of neighbors thinking on other neighbors who didn't, somebody didn't get invited to the Super Bowl party, so they tell somebody that, hey, I think they're renting out their house or something like that?
We get a few, but it's a very small percentage. It really is. It's a very small percentage of the number of investigations that we have. Most of them are based from the process or the generation of returned mail.
I see. Okay. You talked about not being proactive, that if you wanted to take it to another level, it might require, what would it require?
Well, actually, we're kind of fostering the possibility of, there are some companies out there that do kind of data mining exercises and come up with potential fraudulent exemption cases, and they do this throughout the country. And we are fostering some communications right now with the county and with the school board to see if they would be interested in a joint effort in maybe, contracting with companies that can do that. We simply don't have the resources to do that. That would be, it's just not cost effective for me to be able to do that.
I see.
We have 3 individuals that work full-time in our homestead investigation unit, and actually I'm getting ready to hire another additional investigator for the current fiscal coming up. And we're working those folks pretty hard.
Of course, the point is not to be mean to people, but to try to get what taxpayers are entitled to.
Absolutely.
How much do you think is lost to fraud or inappropriate exemptions?
Sure. We have some statistics out on the website. I can't tell you off the top of my head. I can tell you that actively we have about 360 cases right now.
Okay.
Now, we can lien a property up to 10 years, depending upon how long they've been receiving, a benefit that they shouldn't have. And Matt, not everybody receives the benefit because they're being deceitful. A lot of times some of our older residents may have had property, say in New York or New Jersey for years, and maybe the surviving spouse does not realize that there was a residency-based exemption, in another state. And it's unfortunate that we can't treat those any different, which is why I'm so proactive in letting folks know that they have to really pay attention to trim notices and homestead renewal receipts and things that come out that infer that you have an exemption.
I imagine now that the economy is doing a little bit better, there'll be a lot of people who maybe were held on to property and moved into assisted living longer than maybe they wanted to otherwise, hoping that the property value would go up. I mean, there must be all kinds of situations like that.
There are. There are some circumstances that because you don't physically reside on the property doesn't mean it's an abandonment that you lose an exemption. For instance, if you had to be in an assisted living facility, if it was a rehabilitative type instance, and it's still that your permanent residence is your home, you may still qualify to keep the exemption there. But if you abandon the property, or if you have another residency-based exemption somewhere else, you can't have both.
Got it. You've done some things to try to make the office more efficient and accountable, including opening a new one. Talk about that a little bit.
We did.
Or reopening an old one.
Reopening an old one,
okay.
Right. Previously, there was a branch of the property appraiser's office on the Merritt Island, and that office had been closed by the previous administration back in 2007. That area alone services about 50,000 residents.
Wow.
So all of those residents were being displaced and were having to drive to our Titusville or Viera or Melbourne office. And we also had an office that was open in the Barefoot Bay area.
Okay.
So that did not see a whole lot of traffic. So what we did was we closed that office, and we worked out an arrangement with those folks where we do what we call precinct calls, where a certain number of days out of the year we take staff and we go down to the Barefoot Bay area. Okay. And we take their, for life changes, we take their homestead applications, those types of things. So we still service those residents. We just don't have an open office there that basically kind of sits vacant most of the year. In turn, we reopened the Merritt Island office, and again, the response has been very, very positive. A lot of those folks that had been driving from the island to Titusville or to the Viera office are very happy that they can handle their services there.
Wow, what a long way to go if you live in Cocoa Beach or Cape Canaveral.
Correct.
That's really convenient. And you're taking sort of the bookmobile approach down to Barefoot Bay.
We are.
What about just efficiency in running in your own office and the budget? I noticed on your website that you posted some cost savings and other things.
We did. I talked a little bit about the restructuring
Right.
in the administrative department. For instance, one of the things that we did there almost immediately was acquired a financial management system. The previous administration had been balancing their budget using an Excel spreadsheet, which is not appropriate and is also very labor intensive. So we acquired a financial management system. I think the total cost was around $30,000, and I was able to use that tool to replace about 2.5 full-time equivalent administrative staff. So, you know, that change alone paid for itself immediately. So instead of having 5 individuals that took care of the finances and payroll and benefits, you know, we have about 2.5. So, you know, that was an immediate cost savings. We're doing things a little bit differently. You know, one of the things, it sounds crazy, but we took out all the desktop printers. You know, when I got there, there must have been, you know, 60 different models that come with 120 different types of printer cartridges that are very, very expensive. And we've been phasing those out and eliminating those and using, you know, network type of printers. That was a huge cost savings there. We have reviewed every contract. We have renegotiated a lot of our service agreements with some of our providers to be much more efficient, you know, in terms of our contract services there in the office. And I would tell you that probably the biggest change that's going on right now is our main tool, the main tool that we use for appraising property. The current computer system is about 10 years old. I'm sorry, about 20 years old. It's a 10-year work-in-progress project that has cost about $2.5 million. It's about 40% complete.
Wow.
And antiquated. So
wait, it's still being built. It's cost $2.5 million, but it's not done yet?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. So we're stopping that bleeding immediately. So within 6 months, we published an RFP for a new CAMA system, computer-assisted mass appraisal system, and we are going to be replacing that tool with something that's much more efficient, that's today's technology, where we'll be able to work within our application and not build applications outside of an antiquated tool. So we're in the throes of that now.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. Why did you run for this office?
Pretty natural progression in my career, Matt. I took a job in the property appraiser's office back in 1986. I was a computer science major, like everybody in the mid-'80s, and worked there during the summer. And the fall came around, and it was really time for me to go back to school and to pursue my computer science degree. And the previous administration convinced me to stay on, and I did. And that turned into 20 years. So in 2006. There was quite a difference in opinion from myself as a director in the organization and in the current administration, and so we parted ways. Once my children were well into college, I decided that I would apply for the job. So,
your first political campaign?
My first political
How did
campaign.
that go? You ran a long, on-foot kind of campaign, from what I understand.
I did.
Against a long-time incumbent and a fairly well-financed former state representative and who had run for other offices. So
right.
Daunting, or how did that go?
No, not daunting. It was a process. It was a long one. You know, we started in June of 2010, and I started with kind of quietly announcing and just getting out there and getting petitions signed and getting myself on the ballot, getting qualified. And we spent pretty much, the next 54 weeks going door to door. So I got a team of folks that were supportive in me applying for this job, and we basically knocked on doors for 54 weeks on bicycle. So it's something a little different. It was a great way to reach voters. It was actually the most efficient way, and I tried every way. I tried by car, you know, by golf cart, by just about every means, and the bicycle became the most efficient way. And it was a great way to stay in shape and feel good, and it was very versatile and easy to get in and get out into different precincts. So that's what I did. I knocked on doors and had unfiltered interviews for 54 weeks.
made it through the Republican primary, and then had a general election opponent I know who was a Democrat. What did you hear from voters? What were some of the things that stuck with you the most that you're trying to work on now that you picked up on the campaign trail?
Well, probably the biggest shock and all was that folks were just amazed I was knocking on their door. And they remembered who had knocked on their door before, and they could tell you. I heard many times the last person that knocked on my door was Mike Herodopoulos, or the last person that knocked on my door was Walken Lawton. So where a lot of folks in the beginning of my venture of canvassing felt that it was too early, I can tell you that it was the exact opposite. Folks remembered me knocking on their door. So the takeaway was I had an unfiltered interview. Folks were able to ask their questions. They were able to vet this candidate and find out, does she have the experience and qualifications required for this position? And that was just a great opportunity for both me and the voter. The other thing was the takeaway for me, having been in the business for so many years, is that I realized with talking for folks that there were so many exemptions and property tax classifications that they just weren't aware of, that many of them were qualified for. I met my share of folks that didn't know what a homestead exemption was and had lived in their house for 10 years.
Wow.
So it was a great way to have an exchange of information.
So not actually going to go walking back to them to give them the information about the homestead exemptions, but other ways to reach out and let people know how to get the best deal on their properties.
Correct. Correct. And one of the things that we're doing now that has really never been done with this office is we're doing a great deal of community outreach. So when there's opportunities to reach seniors at senior events and festivals, we attend those. When there's opportunities to reach veterans with that information, we attend those. I've given many presentations about the property tax process, the reevaluation process, what to do if you disagree with your value, how the value adjustment board process works, how the informal conference with this office works. So, we're doing our best to reach, everybody.
Dana Blickley, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for today's show. Remember, you can comment on anything you see on the program or read in Florida Today by sending an email to me at letters@floridatoday.com. We'll see you right here next week on The Matt Reed Show.